Matilda has just been revamped in the latest patch 1.8.20, and her kit right now gives her the tools to play her as a burst assassin. As such, I think we should explore a full damage build so we can maximize her one-shot potential. Today, we will be comparing 7 full damage builds with Matilda on squishy and tanky enemies to determine the builds with the highest damage potential for a burst Matilda. For players who want to play her more towards the utility side, I have also included 7 hybrid builds and 5 utility builds for comparisons. Alright, let's begin.
I can be faster! We better be on the road, Clint. It's a long way.
So here, I'm comparing her damage against 3 different types of enemies based on the average Mobile Legends hero stats at level 15. For example, it's common that we can expect a squishy enemy to build Tough Boots and Athena Shield with a damaged Matilda in play. And if they have built these defensive items, we can expect their total magic defense to be around 132 and their total HP to be around 5800. Now, the total HP is also very important here because Glowing Wand has a damage passive that scales based on the enemy's HP, which does contribute a significant amount of extra damage to the total in builds with Glowing Wand. On this side, we have a squishy enemy with just Tough Boots, which is very common as well. On the right panel, I equipped the test subjects with Radiant Armor and Athena Shield, and increased the total HP to be about 9300 to better represent the stats that a max level tanky enemy will likely have. I also need to mention that the emblem I'm using for the test on the full damage builds is the Assassin's emblem with this setup. Now, let's play through the rest of the builds.
At least you tried. Well, I would love you to run from this. Above the horizon rises the beautiful sun. I would love you to run from this. Get going now. Only the brave have the courage to confront the intruder. Only the brave have the courage to confront the intruder.
Here is the final chart with all of the builds. Since Matilda is more for single target damage, we should be focusing on the squishy enemies, so damage to squishy targets should be our priority. Build 4 did the most damage to a squishy with Athenas, but was one of the weakest when dealing damage to an enemy without Athenas. Meanwhile, builds 1 to 3 had high damage to squishy targets, mostly because of the Clock of Destiny and Lightning Truncheon combo. You have to be more precise with this build, because it will deal significantly less damage when Lightning Truncheon is on cooldown, or when it doesn't trigger on your intended target. Here's how the damage fall off looks like when Lightning Truncheon is not triggered correctly. For that reason, I would actually prefer build 4 over the rest of the builds when I'm trying to maximize my damage on Matilda, since it also has the best damage against squishies with Athenas and also other tanky enemies. It is also more consistent without relying on Lightning Truncheon being off cooldown and landing on the right target. If you like Flask of the Oasis in your build for some extra shielding to your allies, build 7 will give the most damage against all enemy types, so it's the obvious winner among the builds with Flask, and is no slouch against the other builds without Flask either. Now, let's move on to the hybrid builds with 4 damage items. We'll be using the Mage emblem with these talents.
To confront the intruders. I'm really lucky to run from this. I'm not really lucky to run from this. Get going now. I can be faster to make you stronger. lucky to run from this. Confront the intruder. Don't be lucky to run from this. You in this land. Don't be lucky to run from this.
Now here's the damage chart. Most of the builds have comparative damage against the squishies except builds 9 and 10. For build 9, Holy Crystal lacked high magic power items to combo with, which severely limited its potential and led to poor results. While in build 10, Necklace of Durance is more of a utility item than for damage. The best performer against squishies is actually build 13, but since it features the Clock Lightning combo, will still require higher precision to achieve its damage potential. Against both squishies with Athenas and tanky enemies, it is build 11 that dealt the most damage. And given the damage to squishies is still high, I'd say this is the most preferable build in most situations. However, I must say that Enchanted Talisman is a great item on Matilda because of the mana regen and cooldown reduction it gives. So we must consider builds 8 to 10, in which case build 8 will be the best in terms of damage. Moving on, we will be looking at utility builds with 3 damage items. I'll be using the support emblem with these talents.
I can't get more excited to get lucky to run from this. Yet you didn't make it, did you? Don't be lucky to run from this. Excited to get going now. I'm lucky to run from this. Lucky to run from this?
I decided to keep Flask and Enchanted Talisman as core items, as I believe that's what we want for a support Matilda, so we are only changing the third item of the build in this case. Build 16 with Glowing Wand has the best damage against squishies with and without Athenas, and also had the second highest damage against tanks, only losing slightly to Build 15 with Divine Glaive. So it's the clear winner for me in terms of damage. As you can see, build 19 with Necklace of Durance sacrifices a lot of damage to provide the anti-heal utility. So if your team has sufficient anti-heal, it's highly advisable not to build it. If you noticed, Glowing Wand featured in all of the builds with the highest damage, which I think solidifies its spot as a core item for Matilda in terms of damage. And so, that wraps things up. I hope you found your best build with Matilda as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.